Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
We want freedom by any means necessary. We want justice by any means necessary. We want equality by any means necessary. We want it now, or we don't think anybody should have it.
Legends aren't born, they're made. They develop, grow, and change over time, and how they are at the beginning bears no resemblance to what they become at the end. Like making a sword, they start off as rough ore, a hunk of rock rising from the dirt, but with greatness within them. A legend must be tested and tempered. They must go through a crucible repeatedly, endure the blows from the world as they are hammered into shape in a process of purification and strengthening. And when they emerge from the flames of their trials by fire, they've gone from stone to steel. That's what happened with Malcolm. Now, this isn't going to be a retrospective on his life. We already know that. What this is a reminder of how Malcolm lived his life, because there's a significant lesson in that for all of us. The story of Malcolm X is deeply rooted in the hearts of all true black people, not just here, but around the world. Though it must be said that he holds special significance for black Americans, not just because his bloodline goes back to the killing fields of the American South like ours does, but because Malcolm's journey is our journey. He began life as Malcolm Little, on the streets here in the nickname Detroit Red. Upon being introduced to Islam, he took the name Malcolm X, and finally, he christened himself El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. History is crucial. As Malcolm said, of all our studies, it is history that is best qualified to reward our research. You cannot truly know yourself without knowing your past, and Malcolm was certainly a master student of history. But even history, as indispensable and empowering as it is, has its limits. History can tell you where you've been, but it cannot tell you which way you should go next. History can tell you what you've done, but it cannot tell you who you are. You have to look inward for that. Malcolm was truly a self-made man. By that I mean his life was a testament to a man who was determined to define himself on his own terms. He didn't allow his oppressor or anyone else to tell him who he was. He instead sought that one out for himself, and then told the whole world who he was. A man who had the courage to tell the truth in a world run by liars. His was a living example of how black people are supposed to go about doing things. Never one to suffer fools gladly, Malcolm X called out the same enemies within that we have to deal with today. Long before the new voices of black media were even born, Malcolm X was already identifying and calling out the phony black misleadership class.
The Negro leaders are famous as apologists. If you recall, one of the most famous Negro leaders in 1959 was asked by you about the black Muslim movement. And he said he knew nothing about it. And the next moment you flashed a picture on the screen with him shaking hands with me. So if you will recall. So this is their policy. This is their attitude or their reaction. They never know what's going on in the Negro community.
Now, doesn't that perfectly describe all these pulpit pimps and phony activists and these media mouthpieces who are on white power's payroll? Malcolm never let these bought and paid for puppet misleaders ever speak for him, and he wanted his people to understand they better not let these sellouts speak for them either. One of the things that bootlicks are always trying to do is to convince us that we need to look for allies, a perpetual never-ending search for other people to validate us, which is just code for non-black people who will hopefully help us. That's been a treadmill to nowhere, which was the entire point of doing it. Well, Malcolm declared 60 years ago what he thought about running around looking for allies.
Instead of you and me running around here seeking allies in our struggle for freedom, in the Irish neighborhood or the Jewish neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood, we need to seek some allies among people who look something like we do. And once we get their allies, it's time out for you and me to stop running away from the wolf right into the arms of the fox, looking for some kind of help.
So you see, the sentiment that we have something better than friends, we've got family, that's not new at all. Malcolm dismissed the idea of desperately seeking allies a long time ago. He understood that whole looking for allies shtick, it's meant to play on black people's insecurities, to get black people running around sticking up for everyone else in the hope that these other groups will reciprocate and stick up for us. We're still waiting. But by far, Malcolm reserved his harshest words for the enforcement arm of white supremacy, the police. People think that the persistent murders that the police carry out using so-called no-knock warrants is a new thing. It's not. Malcolm called it out 60 years ago.
The recent law that they passed that gives the police the permission to walk in anybody's house without knocking is an anti-Negro law. In blunt terms, it's just an anti-Negro law.
Before the uprisings of 2020, before Black Lives Matter, Malcolm was calling out police murders of black Americans, and he also warned that unless the government stopped carrying out and promoting these state-sanctioned killings, then they would not be able to control the possible consequences, and those consequences would prove global. And he also said that our resistance would inspire people around the world to copy us.
Nowadays, you're not going to have race riots anymore. You'll have a race war. The day of race riots are outdated. A riot is something that's contained to a certain area. Nowadays, any kind of eruption like that takes place, you'll find that it will have a chain reaction. It will pop up everywhere, and it won't be limited to this continent. Any effort today that is made to bring massive retaliation against the black population of this country, you will find people who look like the oppressors, also realizing how it feels to be the victim of mass retaliation in other countries.
The white media was completely shocked and confused when they saw how our uprisings and protests of 2020 spread like shockwaves around the world, and how people all over the planet were copying what we did. But we weren't surprised at all. And had Malcolm still been alive, he wouldn't have either. He predicted all of this because he understood white supremacy is a global system and that there's a lot of people in a lot of different places who are sick of it too. And as for how to stop these murders and repression by the state, Malcolm had the answer to that one too.
My brothers and sisters, we have to put a stop to this. And it will never be stopped until we stop it ourselves.
Malcolm also talked about what the black media calls leaderless resistance. That you would have groups of black people coming together, but there wouldn't be any leaders for them. And they would seem almost invisible, because no matter how much you look for them, you can't find them, and yet they're there.
And Negroes are banding together.
Banding together in what kind of movements?
Different kinds of movements, all kinds of movements, and they remain almost invisible. They remain almost unknown, but yet they are there. When I say invisible, I mean invisible in the sense that their existence is unknown, and no matter how much you try and track them down, you can't find them.
Malcolm's was the kind of courage that it took to break the chains of chattel slavery and to snatch the white mob's nooses from their hands. His was the kind of courage it took to change the condition of our people, and we had better rediscover that kind of courage if we hope to preserve ourselves. Malcolm was already living and practicing all the essential principles of black empowerment, and that is why we will and must honor him. Where we're trying to go, Brother Malcolm had already been. We follow in the footsteps of a true moral and spiritual titan. Today was the day that our warrior scholar, our shining prince, was born. As you start this day, I ask you to rededicate yourself to the principles that Malcolm lived his life by and gave his life to protect. Not because that's what Malcolm would have wanted, but because he understood that's what his people needed. We salute you, Brother Malcolm. May we prove ourselves worthy of your sacrifice and prosper by your example. Good day, and be one.